And
Okay.
that's when then everybody started calling her on Monday morning. She went to a city council meeting and accused us. They got her all, she's an excitable person.
Mm,
And they got her all revved up about this. They called her and said, "You've been the victim of a crime." She
okay.
didn't report a crime. They told her she'd been the victim of a crime. They got her all excited. She went to the city council meeting about it. She complained that, one, we had broken into some computer and stolen something. Two, that we had given it to the vice mayor. And three, that the vice mayor had posted it all over Facebook. Well, none of those three things were true.
Okay.
And in fact, I had a call with her after the city council meeting, and she admitted that she knew they weren't true.
Okay.
I think she was just so angry that she said them, but she said, no, she actually identified who the person was who gave us the document. She says, "I'll bet you that it's my husband gave it to Pam Mogg, and Pam Mogg gave it to you and gave it to Ruth." And that's exactly what happened. She knew it that night. And I had some discussions with her about, then why did you say something else in a public meeting?
Right.
Well, I didn't get a very good answer to that.
And she knew
But
she was lying or fabricating when she said this in front of
I mean,
everybody.
I think whether you know something or you just are so mad that
Mm,
you sort of overstate your case. I don't know. I don't know what it was, but we reported that on Wednesday, and we thought that was the end of it. We reported the truth, and we
mm,
reported what she said.
mm.
And then on Friday is when they showed up at our office and
So
at
did
the
she have
homes
to
and
go?
everywhere.
Did she have to go and file a police report and say this and write it down, and then they give it to?
That's only now beginning to come out.
Uh,
And they apparently contacted her on that Monday, and then they continued on Tuesday and Wednesday, and she signed it. She did a written statement on Wednesday. Uh, we later heard from various police officers, including one who was already leaving the department, that he had heard wind of this raid coming, but didn't
okay.
know what it was and didn't want to participate in it because he was leaving the department. Uh, and and it was bragged that this was going to be the biggest raid we'd ever done, and this happened on Wednesday before it happened. So they build up to the time. Why they couldn't pick up the phone and call us,
Yeah.
or drop by and ask us a simple question, or call the person who Ruth Herbal, the vice mayor, had already identified was the source. And everybody's been willing to tell the truth. I mean, we didn't disclose the name of Pam Mogg, not that she'd ask us not to, just we
Right.
didn't think it was necessary. But if they had told us we need to know who it is, I probably would have picked up the phone and called Pam Mogg and said, "Do you mind if I tell her?"
Right.
And she would have said, "No, I don't mind." So everybody admitted it. They would have admitted it, but they wasn't. That's why I'm saying this wasn't about finding out something. This was about proving that we're the man and we can do what
So
we want.
okay, I'm in a small town too, as I said before, and I like following trails. So she told you guys she had fabricated the story, but when the authorities came to her, she kind of changed her story.
Well, and her story to them of my conversation with her that Monday night is also uh, a little different from reality. So there's contention she made in that I threatened I was going to use this against her. And
Mm,
actually what I said was, Carrie, if you'd never, this was never going to come out. No
mm,
one was going to mention this publicly. You're the one who mentioned it publicly. You're the one who now disclosed that this document was out there. And once you start talking about the document, then we're going to have to say what's in the document.
right,
And I said, if you would have kept your mouth shut, and
right.
you wouldn't be exposed. But you needed to lash out at somebody, and that translated in her statement to, I threatened her that if she didn't do what I wanted her, that I would expose the document. Well,
Right.
first of all, it had already been exposed at that point. So I mean, it doesn't make any sense. The whole thing doesn't make any sense.
So when you had the raid was specifically dealing with her one case, or because so many people came, was the assumption from people, and maybe some that are haters that don't like your publication, that this newspaper is doing identity theft and selling drugs or whatever, and we need to bring the full force down on this
Well,
paper.
first of all, identity theft you know, what do you think of when you think of identity theft? You're getting somebody's credit card number to buy something in their credit card thing, or you're going to set up a loan on their name. I mean, we had no intent of doing any of that.
Right.
And my first day on the job as a reporter, you know, I should never say there are many great police officers in the world, and there are some who think they're bullies. And my first day on the job back in the 70s, watch commander pulled me aside and said, "Give me your notebook." And I, reached over and grabbed me my notebook, and he says, "I just filled it up with all my notes about the police." He says, "I'm going to teach you an important lesson." And he took my notebook and just tore it to shreds.
Oh, wow.
And he said, "Now, if I had had the intent of destroying your notebook, I would be guilty of criminal damage to property. But
Okay.
my intent was to teach you an important lesson about the law, so I have committed no crime." Now, he was a bully. He was an a-hole. I mean, there's a bunch of things you could say about him.
Right.
We eventually made nice to him by running a story. He also was a model train enthusiast. We ran a story about his model trains at some point, and then he liked us. But he's right. We had no criminal intent to steal her identity. Not only did we not have any intent to do it, we didn't do anything illegal. We did what the state told us to do, and the state immediately admitted it wasn't illegal. The other one was unauthorized access of a computer system. Well, if they would have called the state, if they would have asked us, "What did you do?" and they called the state would have said, "Oh, that's not illegal. That's not illegal at all. There's nothing under." They didn't do very good research. They didn't want to do research. They wanted to get us, and they wanted to get Ruth Herbal. And unfortunately, the nice thing for us is there's all these journalism groups out there that have come, immediately rushed to our aid. There's no, National Association of Vice Mayors that rushed to Ruth Herbal's aid, because we can't see any reason why they ever searched her house. And one of the several other news organizations have given the affidavit, the probable cause affidavit for searching Ruth Herbal's house, to various judges, and they've said she's not accused of a crime. I mean, what is this search going to reveal? Nothing. She's already, everything that it could reveal, she'd already disclosed. So it was just to intimidate.
Does she go against the grain as far as politics?
She's the great dissenter. She's the 4-1 vote. She's the one, and sometimes the 3-2 vote if she gets one of another colleague on there. The irony of this is that the mayor had previously been the city administrator, and he'd run for city council before, and he lost. He finished dead last.
Okay.
In the race for city council. Then he decided to run for mayor, and he actually was recruited by the vice mayor, Ruth Herbal, to be part of a ticket of 3 people. They wanted to get rid of the current city administrator that was on duty, and they only had 2 votes. It was a 3-2 vote every time they came up. They wanted to flip that 3-2 vote, and they got the current mayor, David Mayfield, to promise them that he would vote to fire the city administrator. So they said, "Well, we'll run on a ticket of the 3 of us together, Ruth Herbal, Jerry Klein, and David Mayfield." And essentially, he won mayor on her coattails.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then he wouldn't fire the city administrator. He changed his mind. And I suppose, you can change your mind, but it was a pretty clear campaign promise that he was going to vote to fire the city administrator. That's why he got elected, why he went from last place to winning the race. How hard
is it being a newspaper and covering the political scene?
Every person who has come in here, the city administrator that they were going to fire is not the city administrator who I'm talking about now, who was just fired. I mean, we've kind of gone through city administrators here, but they brought in a guy as city administrator last summer, who we pointed out had a track record of being lasting only a few months and then taking his great golden parachute that he negotiated and flighting home with it. Well, guess what? That happened here too. He did some things that were pretty bad. I'm not entirely convinced that he didn't intentionally do some of them. He showed a staff member a picture of a woman who was applying for a sign permit, who had formerly been a porn model. But it wasn't, the picture was not pornographic in any way. She was wearing a, I mean, you see it on 6:30 at night on commercial television. It's not anything weird. And the city offices hated him and they wanted to get rid of him. He then used in several conversations the N-word. I think he intentionally did it. I don't know. I never will know that answer, but the police chief, the assistant chief, and the city clerk and the police chief were married. Both resigned. All three resigned. And actually, the assistant chief is the one who I mentioned. It's the next door neighbor to my mother. He resigned as assistant chief, and then he went back to the sheriff's department later as an investigator with the sheriff's. That's what he's resigned from now. So, but the city administrator who came in then, the new city administrator who's come in after him, even Gideon Cody, the police chief, all have told us that before they were hired, the mayor sat down with them and told them what a terrible newspaper we are and how we're such an impediment to the future of the city. So we started off with them thinking, oh my God, we can't ever talk to those people. And now Gideon Cody never came around, but both the city administrators have sort of said, well, that really wasn't right. we found out you really aren't that bad. And I don't know how long this has been going on. The mayor hates us. He always has. He tried to put over, and this is why he's really upset with Ruth Herbel. Last fall, the bond attorneys, the attorneys that make bond issues for the cities, recommended this wonderful law that this will save your taxes. It will save everything. And it allowed the city council to borrow to do street repairs. If off of a project, the state law said if you had an engineer say that there's urgently needed repairs, you can do that. But they had home rule, and they changed it from engineer urgently needed. Anytime the city administrator says that there's a project that needs doing, you can put it on this list, and you can do bonding off this list. And they published this in the city newsletter. They were required to publish it in our paper, and they published the full version there. But in the city the newsletter that goes out to utility clients, they published section 1 of the proposed law. They didn't publish section 2, which says that, oh, by the way, instead of having bond elections, we don't need those elections anymore. The city council can just approve this automatically. And they don't even need to do it by ordinance. They can do it by simple resolution, which doesn't have to be published at all. They could incur this debt. Well, Vice Mayor Herbel, who at the time wasn't the vice mayor, she was just a council member, was opposed to this and got a petition drive up and got it put on the ballot, and it was rejected by a 9-1 margin. Once it was known that this was really, the city has not, by the way, turned down a bond issue. In fact, it approved one for the school district just this spring. It has. There was one bond issue that was disapproved of countywide a few years ago, and that was to build a jail that was going to be housing inmates from other counties, and it's going to be a huge jail. And the voters rejected it, and then they came back and proposed a bond issue that was, going to be the jail the size that the county needed, not getting into the jail business. And the voters approved that. So, I mean, the voters have had a record of they aren't just automatically, we won't pay for bond issues. They've approved them with some regularity. So I don't really know why it was necessary to eliminate the vote, except that it made it easier for the bond attorneys to come in and, sell you more bonds.
And being a small town paper too,
we reported that extensively, and Ruth Herbel did the campaign against it. She was the point person on the campaign against it, and the mayor didn't like that. So right after that campaign went out, the mayor tried to launch a petition drive. He was one of 6 people on there that had a petition drive to recall Ruth Herbel from office. They didn't get enough signatures. So the campaign died.
When's the term up for the mayor?
The mayor is leaving office in January. He's not running for re-election. And so I just honestly think Mickey Mouse would beat him in an election right now. But and I think he knows that.
And so when's the last time you had an interview, a Q&A or whatever with the mayor in the paper, if you have?
For a long time, he would not return any of our calls or
Wow.
talk to us about anything. He has recently begun returning calls, and he said people weren't leaving me messages, and they sent things to my cell phone, but I have a thing on my cell phone that will reject anybody that I don't know who it is, and that's obviously what happened, is that nobody ever tried to call him. But we've tried to ask him questions, after meetings in person, face to face, and he just walk away from us.
Wow.
So,
And so he's one of the people that I guess doesn't support your paper.
He doesn't support our paper. He used to be the city administrator, and was very controversial. He survived that by a 1-vote margin. They tried to fire him. Prior to that, he was the police chief. And prior to that, he was a highway patrolman. He still works as a prison transport officer for the sheriff's department. So I don't want to tar all highway patrolmen with the same stick, but highway patrolmen are people who work out in rural areas, and they're sort of, I'm the law here. They're Judge Dredd. And he kind of has that personality. And
so tell me the good things about your city.
Well, if you came here, up in front of our newspaper office, after they raided my mother's house, she warned them several times. She said, "You're going to be the death of me. If I have a heart attack and die after this, you're going to be guilty of murder." I mean, we've got some of this on body cam, and she really fought him, and she really didn't want him there. But outside, we had this planter that we didn't have any plants in. A group of people from the city have come down, and ever since her death, they have been tending this thing. They've been putting plants. They put plants all over our railing. I mean, it looks like, when you see the Buckingham Palace after Princess Di died, and they have all these flowers laying out in front of it. It kind of looks like that on a small town scale. They put a picture of her in the middle of this plant, and they've been tending it like on a daily basis.
Yeah, I've seen that picture.
That's what Marion's really like. I mean, when you get away from the politics of it, the people are, it's a nice community. It's got some problems, and it has, one of the things that I think has happened in small towns, and this is it's happened in small towns, and it's happened in central cities, that a lot of people leave because there's not economic opportunity for them. Right. The businesses in town are no longer locally owned. Right. As much as they can be. They're chain owned. So if you're really a smart kid who wants to advance in the world, you're probably going to end up moving out of town. It's kind of created a leadership vacuum. And it's very, as I say, I did some work in some magazine articles and other things about central cities, and the Census Bureau stats on the central cities and rural communities are very similar. Right. The income, education, many things that are similar to them. And it has this leadership vacuum. It used to be in these small towns, and possibly in the central cities too, that there were a lot of local business people who ran the local store. Well, the local store is now, Family Dollar or Dollar General or someplace like that, or Casey's General Store, and the same opportunities don't exist for people to stay there. We've also seen the passing of the greatest generation, as Tom Brokaw used to call it, and those were people who, they had a sense of civic responsibility that I'm not sure is present in my generation, and particularly later generations than that. There's also been this sort of social media cocooning that people only listen to things that they agree with.
Yeah, yeah.
uh, and 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 so that diminishes leadership possibilities. That diminishes the idea of people sitting back and just analyzing what's going on. The city adopted its budget. The city council never even discussed what's in it. And they admitted it. I mean, there were questions made. Well, why is this increased? We don't know.
Right.
Well, why are you proposing a 9 mil increase in the tax levy? Well, they told us we needed something, but
Right.
what is it and where is it? And they didn't really know. Now, the city administrator has since come to me and said, I think I screwed up on the budget. I should have gotten the council more involved in it. But,
Okay.
you know, he's the city administrator, not the city manager.
Right.
He's supposed to be providing administrative support, not running the town. And when you step, and he's new, this is his first job he's ever had in that. Uh, and he just graduated from a college program about it. In the lack of leadership and the lack of people being involved, people will step in. People will fill that void, and whether they fill it, I don't think people are lining their pockets. I don't think they're lining their power, and they like the fact that they've got power, and they like the fact that they don't have to talk to anybody about it because people don't question them.
And
Uh,
it's one thing. Whose fault is that? Is that the fault of people in the community? Because the debate was recent. How many people watched that? Because I kind of tell
yeah,
people again, if and
people
if
don't. People
right,
don't want to watch those things. People don't want to question things. They don't want to. They've already made up their mind.
yeah,
They've already decided this is bad, this is good,
mhm,
and I don't need to. I don't need to be bothered with information. I don't.
and
Facts are irrelevant, and some of this I will say, I think is traceable to the sort of populist movement in government and the idea that if you believe something, if you believe it, it must be true. And
right,
and so facts, well, no, facts are not what you believe. I mean, belief means truth, and that isn't true. I mean, there's a lot of things out there that, and people that question it are creating problems and waves. And that's not the Barney the dinosaur generation of I
yeah,
love you and you love me,
right,
and everybody keep your head down and hunker down. And I taught for 26 years at the University of Illinois, and one of the advice I always gave to the students is don't try to fit in, try to stand out. But
okay.
that's not what society rewards right now. They reward people who fit in,
Because
who
when you whether you're political or whether you're journalistic, if you're not that person that fits in with everybody, and I can tell you from both sides, then you're going to take a hit. And
yeah,
sometimes you have to worry if it's going to affect, your family, because you may be able to, stand guard, but it may affect your family through different ways. If somebody tells me, not that I believe in conspiracies, but since I've been involved with politics, I believe anything.
well,
Literally,
people won't run for office because they say, "Oh, I'll lose business. I've
yeah.
got a business in town. People will stop coming to my business." Well, some of them will because
Mhm.
they don't like it. I think that's stupid. And I've written an editorial saying, we're too small to have things like that. One of my reporters saw a comment about what the local newspaper should be, and it's from the co-owner of one of the only grocery store in town.
Okay.
And he makes a statement: it ought to be supportive, it ought to be a cheerleader for the
Yeah.
community. Well, I disagree with that,
Right.
and I will tell him so. My reporter says, and I'm going to stop doing business with you. And I said, I won't do that.
Okay.
We're too small to cut off our nose to spite our face.
But that's kind of
Uh,
what we see. We don't understand. Even like I said, politically, I will say some things, and I'll say it because I've kind of known it. I may not support people where I'm at because I've dealt with them on a personal level, and I say if you disrespect me as a consumer or whatever, you're going to disrespect that next person.
yeah,
So, do you, as a journalist, and I asked this guy, I don't know if you ever heard of him, David Garrow. He
yeah,
wrote, but he helped on the show Eyes on the Prize and is a Dr. King, I mean, very knowledgeable about him. So I interviewed him not too long ago, and we were talking about and it's hard, the duties of somebody, if you have power and whatever you believe in, if it's God or whatever you believe in, and you have this power to tell people things, but you don't use that power, are you not using the power or abilities that were given to you?
Well,
Because you may offend people, but you're putting that truth out.
I think as a journalist, we have a moral, ethical obligation to report what we know. It's up to the people to decide what to do with it.
Uh-huh.
And you made some mention of this in some of your intro section, and I agree entirely with the way you started off. You're saying, we're going to we're going to give you all the facts. You decide what to do with them.
Mhm.
I'm not going to try to decide what to do with them.
Right.
I will encourage you to study them, and I'm going to hope, like Thomas Jefferson said, that an informed public will eventually come to the right decision. They might not always. I mean, and Thomas Jefferson came to some pretty wrong decisions in his life himself, but eventually, I think the spirit that he used will come out right. Um, there are people who don't want information out there.
Mhm.
It's just, it's none of anybody's business. Why do we need to know that? We need it's negative, but I really think that the getting people to be engaged so that they understand that there's two aspects to democracy.
Mhm.
You've got to listen to what other people say, but you've got to
Right.
talk too.
Right.
You've got to express your views. You can't just sit there and clam up and be a silent majority or a silent minority or whatever.
Mhm.
You've got to have it. You've got to have the discussions. We've got to have discussions, and then we've got to have dialogue. You've got to have people who come together and say, I've got these ideas, I've got these ideas. Where do they work together?
Right.
How can we make this work together? And that's what makes democracy work. If we just say, you're terrible, and we don't listen to each other, uh, democracy doesn't work.
Yeah.
It will eventually side with whoever the majority is, and whoever the minority is can be damned.
Right.
And that isn't what we're supposed to do. That isn't the way it works. That isn't the way it has worked. Because
Because
every on some level, we are all part of a majority and we are all part of a minority.
yeah.
I mean, we each are, depending on what it is that we happen to be the certain issue with. And so, yeah, this is why people warned against democracy. A pure democracy would be the tyranny of the majority. But
Right.
we've got a democracy that's trying to say, yeah, we're doing with the will of the majority, but we're also trying very hard to protect various different minorities. And by this, I don't mean racial minorities, although it includes them. It's people who, believe differently on an issue, and the other thing about information is information lets you establish a better position on things. I think
Mhm.
we've seen that in our society in movement on certain issues that have happened over the course of time. We were very one-sided on certain issues, and as we began to understand that there are, this is Kansas, and everybody was surprised that the voters in Kansas rejected what was a very anti-abortion
Oh,
amendment
yeah.
to the Constitution, because people in Kansas have gotten to know people who have had to exercise reproductive rights, and that this is not as portrayed a cavalier decision that they made. It
Right.
was a serious, heartfelt decision that most people who have made it one way or another have done so with serious thought, and that becomes a libertarian issue that they have the right to make that decision for themselves.
Okay.
They're not doing it in a cavalier manner. And I think people understood that, and that's why the vote went the way it did.
So did that
Uh,
surprise you, or
and I think we're seeing that with the sympathy for same-sex marriage that came across because people started to know there are people I know who are involved in those relationships.
right?
Marion, this is the reddest of red areas. There's still people wandering around here. There are signs in windows about Trump and people wearing Trump hats and so
Right.
on. But it's also a town where the senior class in high school is allowed to paint their parking spaces.
Okay.
And they've eliminated it now
Okay.
because one of the kids painted a parking space that had the gay flags on it, the color of the gay flag on it. And nobody thought anything of it, except one person somewhere during the middle of the night one night came in with tar and covered up his flag.
Oh, wow.
The next day, the community united behind the kid. The principal of the school went out there and they scrubbed the tar off and restored the flag. And the community was, if they had found out who'd done it, they would have been punishing the person who put tar on the flag. Now, this, as I say, is a very ultra conservative community that you wouldn't think supports gay rights and all, but it supported this kid because he also is the box boy at the grocery store.
Right. Okay.
And they know him. Okay. And the more that they know him, and that's what journalism does. It puts human faces on issues. Mm-hmm. It's easy to say we're going to deny food stamps to all the welfare cheats.
Right.
But if you put a face on them and say, are you going to really deny food stamps to this person, this mother and family who's going to only need it for probably a few months and whatever, and you actually get facts out there rather than slogans,
yes,
it tends to come to a conclusion. It can come to a conclusion that will, I should use an example that's on the other side of the equation. Okay. Do we really need to have a living wage that works and that's this much money? Right. Because this family can really live in Marion, Kansas on a lot less than that. Okay. So, I mean, the information can challenge a conservative viewpoint. It can challenge a liberal viewpoint. And it doesn't necessarily result in more liberal thinking to have information out there. I'm not sure that I can give you as many examples where it doesn't tend to go in that direction, but there are times when it will go both ways. And values and family values and really having family values, I think people will support that too. There's a lot of misnomers.